Welcome to Wednesday Wanderings. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. I cannot believe that we celebrate Ascension already tomorrow. 2021 is flying past. But it is a year that is continuing to prove one in which we are stretched, in which we continue to grow, in which we continue to face challenges that we would never have imagined 12 to 18 months back. Part of a journey that Dawn and I have been on, my wife Dawn and I have been on since probably 10 years back, has been an interaction, initially an introduction to, and then an ongoing interaction with something called the Enneagram. Some of you may be familiar with it, others of you may not. I do encourage you, if you're not, just to Google it and explore what it may mean for yourselves. A good site is the EnneagramInstitute.com. One of the aspects that the Enneagram talks to, both in terms of spirituality and life, is that there's a link to that wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul ends by saying, these three are left: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. One of the interesting aspects for me of the Enneagram is that it points out that faith, hope, and love are three really important aspects of who we are as human beings. Three things that in many ways motivate us, drive us, comfort us, lead and guide us. And for each of us, one of those may be more central. And the other two aspects are things that we need to grow into. For me, faith is there. And it's not to say that I initially find faith easy. It's not to say that I find belief and trust easy. But it's something that does undergird my life. And I have to be a little bit more conscious about loving and hoping, and very conscious that in quite a lot of my preaching, those two words show up. And at the moment, love is one of those things that's just front and central for me again this week, and in a number of ways has just popped up. That love actually is foundational to how we live as human beings in terms of relationship, and that it is so fundamentally important to relationship. Patrick Otuma, and you've probably just groaned at hearing his name again because I mention him regularly, but there's a wonderful prayer in his book, Daily Prayer with the Corrymeela Community. And just a phrase or a sentence that came out of the prayer for today, in fact, reads as follows: may we find our foundation in the work of love, demanding, tiring, true, and human, and holy. Let me read that to you again. May we find our foundation in the work of love, demanding, tiring, true, and human, and holy. I was intrigued on Monday evening. We meet once a month as lay ministers in the parish. And we had an evening just of sharing around what we were reading, what God perhaps was or wasn't saying to us through some of our reading, both secular and sacred, and really reflecting on that. And I was intrigued that one of our lay ministers was reflecting how God was really inviting them to look beyond themselves and to see others and to love others, and recognizing that her life had been quite self-focused, and God was really saying, look out. And what intrigued me was that my experience was the opposite, that God was really encouraging me to look in, that I spent so much of my life in ministry looking out at others and other communities. And just a reminder this week of the need to love myself, and to really draw on that. And in practical terms, for me, loving myself is just recognizing that I'm the one that sets the boundaries in my life, that I cannot have, as I sometimes do, an expectation that others would do that, or even respect that there may be boundaries that I need to keep. And part of that's an interaction with my diary, just being conscious of putting in times for exercise. And I've begun, haven't been hugely successful this week, did manage it last week, to actually just block off times where it says that I'm unavailable. And so when I go into my diary, I don't easily put a meeting into that space, and that my secretary and my wife, who also have access to my diaries, similarly don't fill that space with other things. And so for me at the moment, part of loving myself is ensuring that I don't get burnt out, that I don't get overcooked, as one of my colleagues once reflected, to burn out, and that it's my responsibility. So Monday night just reminded me that God works with us all in different ways, and we have different needs at different times. Some of us need to be putting boundaries in place. Some of us need to be lifting boundaries in order to allow others in. And God pushes all those buttons in our lives. And the question is, how are we? How do we respond to them? And what does that mean for us? I also asked the question just in the context of the COVID pandemic and the impact it's had on our lives. Many of us working from home, not that that's an unusual thing for me. My church office actually is attached to the house, so life, so work and home life are often blurred just physically. But how are we respecting our own lives? How are we creating boundaries and some sense of order in just the chaos of life? We're used to others doing that for us. We're expected to arrive in the office, and may again be being expected to arrive at the office at a certain time each day, and one leaves and goes home at another time, and society kind of putting those boundaries in place for us. During the pandemic, much of that has been washed away, and we're given a greater responsibility for our own lives, our own ability to be available to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, to those we work for and those we serve. And I'm just aware of myself and wanting to encourage you to become aware too of the need to really begin to define those kind of, or just to explore what some of those boundaries may be or not be at this particular point. There was always a kind of social tradition that you didn't phone anybody before a certain time in the morning, and you didn't phone them after a certain time in the evening. During COVID, everything's got wrapped up. If we have a thought at midnight, we send it. And of course, if that person's phone's on, it goes beep, and it may wake them up. And maybe it's their responsibility to have their phone off, but also maybe it's my responsibility to be thoughtful about what time I actually seek to communicate with other people. So there are many practical levels to what it means to love, for me to love myself and for me to love you. And we find that out in terms of this variety of space in which we live at the moment. So I'd like to close with those two questions. How are you loving yourself today, this week, this month? And how are you loving others today, this week, this month?